So you've been thinking about swapping a Honda K24 into your Subaru BRZ or Scion FRS, but you're not exactly sure where to start. Well, here's how you do it. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. My name is Sean, and over the last 2.5 years, I have been building this, my turbo K24 swap Subaru BRZ. And in that time, I have put together what I believe to be the most comprehensive step-by-step guide to this particular engine swap. This is a 28-part series that basically takes you from stock FA20 engine, BRZ or FRS, or GT86, whichever you've got, to fully running and driving K24 swapped completed car. And this series is really intended to be used alongside the K-Power installation guide, which is essentially what I used for the framework of my entire build. It is not sponsored by K-Power. I am not sponsored by K-Power. They did not provide anything to me for free. I bought all of these parts to do this swap myself, and my bank account can attest for that. Now, I want to start off by saying I am not perfect. I am human, I make mistakes, and there are times when I misspeak about certain things, and that's really why I recommend to, as you're watching this series, or if you're finding this helpful in your engine swap, reference the K-Power installation guide. They're a professional company. I'm just a guy who does things on YouTube for when it is free time. So if sometimes when it comes down to torque specs, I might be torquing to 20 foot-pounds, but in my head, the thing that comes out that goes on camera is 10 foot-pounds. I've done my best to mitigate that. I think there's only a couple of different instances where that happens, but I'm human. I'm not perfect. None of us are, right? We all make mistakes, but I've done my best over the last 2.5 years to put together as easy and as comprehensive of a guide as I possibly can. So with that said, there are some notable things that I want to point out about my build that are different from a standard K-Power naturally aspirated stock transmission engine swap. So in particular, my car is turbocharged, so that means that I have a turbo manifold and a whole turbo setup, as opposed to just a regular exhaust manifold that goes out the back of the car. So what that is going to mean, at least right now, at the time of recording this, there are no pre-made, perfect, bolt-in solutions for an exhaust or a turbo downpipe or intercooler piping for this particular turbo manifold and this particular intercooler setup. So if this is something that you're interested in doing, going with a turbo setup, you'll want to keep that in mind. At least right now, February of 2024, to my knowledge, there aren't any turbo downpipe kits that work in conjunction with a specific turbo manifold, nor is there any prefabbed bolted in for your intake manifold or your intercooler piping. So you might either need to custom fabricate some things like I did for my build, or find a shop that does custom fabrication and can make all of those parts for you. That's sort of caveat number one. Caveat number two for my particular swap is that I am not using the stock BRZ FRS transmission. The reason I decided not to go with that option is because of the fact that I knew that I was going to be turbocharging this engine and I was going to want to make more power. The limits on the stock transmission, I believe from factory, are rated to 350 foot-pounds of torque. I could be, don't cut my head off if that's not exactly right, but I have seen stock transmissions fail on stock FA20 power with like an intake and exhaust and like an E85 tune. I have seen fourth gear shred itself apart on stock power. I have seen these transmissions fall apart on turbocharged FA20 cars where they're making 250 to 300 wheel horsepower and sort of an unknown lower value 200 foot-pounds of torque. So when I was preparing to do this swap, I didn't want to get the whole thing done with the stock transmission and then have it break and eventually have to swap to something in the future. So what I decided to go with was a CD009 out of a 350Z or a G35. Specifically, I got mine out of a G35, but it doesn't make too much of a difference in the same transmission. And what comes along with that is a different adapter to be able to make the K24 and the CD009 transmission work together, a custom drive shaft, because again, that's one of those things that isn't exactly sort of sorted out yet. This is still a relatively new swap. It's only been around for a couple of years. It's not like you're doing a KSwap into a Civic hatch, like an EK hatch or an EG hatch. People have been doing those for decades, really. So there is still some advancement that needs to come along when it comes to doing this swap with different transmission options. But if you have a drive shaft shop near you, if you take your measurements once you have your engine in place from the back of your transmission to where your diff is located, you can have a shop build you a custom drive shaft similar to how I did mine. Now, if you're interested in getting an idea of how expensive this engine swap could potentially be, I have a video on my channel, I'll link it either up here or up there, of how much it cost me to do my engine swap. And the round-ish number is about $25,000. And that's with custom fabrication, custom drive shaft, all of the extra bits and pieces that come along with the turbo setup, all of the AN lines for the oil and coolant feeds to the turbo, a lot of added complexity, and thus a lot of added financial investment that goes into that. Now, if you want to make slightly lower power, if you want to make, say, 350 wheel horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque, and you're okay with using the stock transmission, maybe with an upgraded gear set down the road if the stock one lets go on you, my best estimate for what that would cost, knowing what I know from doing this whole thing, I would say closer to $20,000 would be sort of what you're kind of shooting for. If you're going to go with an NA swap, just K24 with, refreshed timing components, a 50-degree VTEC cam gear, and basically the entire KSwap package, which includes wiring, engine, trans mounts, engine to transmission adapter, AC and heat, all of the coolant necessary stuff, the wiring, the standalone ECU to make all of the brains and the electronics work. That kind of a swap would run you, I would shoot for about $15,000. So there's really sort of three tiers, if you will. You have turbo with larger power, and that's going to be, alternate transmission with, different drive shaft, potentially different differential and axles potentially if you're going big power. And then you have turbo, but not huge power and stock transmission. And then you have your naturally aspirated K24 bills utilizing the entirety of the K-Power setup, which is basically you purchase that and you'll need a few other odds and ends, bits and pieces here and there, but reasonably you're going to be able to get that done for under 15. So that's essentially the introduction for the series. We've talked about how my swap is set up, we've talked about pricing, we've talked about how to go about, following the series and what resources you have. I would also recommend to join the K24 Swapped BRZ Facebook group, which is hosted and sponsored by K-Power. There's a lot of us in there. I'm in there, and we're bouncing questions off of each other all the time. We have new people joining saying, what did you run for this? What parts did you run for that? What size intercooler piping are you running? All of these questions. And everybody from this whole community chimes in. It's a very welcoming place to be. There's really not a whole lot of toxic stuff. It's a pretty nice community to be in. to be perfectly honest, from my perspective. So that's a great place to answer questions. If you leave your comments on the videos, I am going to do my best to be able to respond to those, to answer those types of questions. And really, I'm just trying to give the people who are interested in this swap in the future down the road options and information on how to go about doing this. I was a complete beginner when I started this swap. I had never done an engine swap before. I'd never even pulled an engine before. I had never opened an engine and redone timing. I had done some welding, but just kind of like as practice in the garage, and my skills improved and got significantly better through the process of having to do all of my own fabrication for this swap. So if you're a person who's looking at getting into something like this, don't think that a lack of experience or a lack of skill is going to hold you back. You will learn along the way and you'll gain a ton of knowledge that you never would have thought that you would gain. I'm the perfect example of that. I've learned a crazy amount just all things automotive related in the last 2.5 to 3 years of doing this swap, planning for it, researching, and all of that kind of stuff. But don't let yourself be discouraged or pushed away from doing a swap like this if you've never done it before or you have no experience. But that's gonna wrap up the introduction for the build series, guys. If you're interested, do subscribe to the channel if you wanna follow my personal build, if you're getting any value out of the build series, or if you're doing your own K24 engine swap. And until next time, build your dreams.